If you're familiar with Iron Man, you know with the arc reactor, so like that would be a major breakthrough. Neuralink is doing a good job. They've kind of gotten into the brain-machine interface. I would say they're almost at the same level as a standard high-performance academic lab.
Dr. Elliott Rouse is an associate professor in the departments of robotics and mechanical engineering at the University of Michigan, where he directs the neurobionics lab.
How do you see the breakthrough in material science like energy harvesting mechanism or exoskeleton?
So we have a whole sort of architecture of technical steps that we follow when building a machine that ensures high power and high performance for its size and weight.
What engineering breakthrough are needed before we can safely give human through wearable robotics?
Great question. Very fun question to think about.
Thank you.
There are a few kind of
Alright, so about 25% of you guys that watch our video say they've not or even subscribed. So if you are watching this video, please do that. It's a little way of showing our support to supporting the team, people who are editing the videos, who are working here with us to make things possible. We build a community, the biggest tech community in Africa, connecting CEOs, top CEOs, best engineers from around the world. So I've been our best to make sure we provide quality content. You can only push us forward by just subscribing to the channel, and that will mean a lot to us. Thank you. All right. Good evening, Professor Rose. It's a very good pleasure to have this section with you on wearable robotics. And initially, we discussed on our previous podcast about human to machine connection because we discussed that earlier because as the director of neurobionics lab at University of Michigan, according to some of your contribution in those areas, so we were able to discuss and cover those topics, and definitely it was a wonderful conversation. So thank you very much for your insights and your explanation. So we're looking forward. We are going to be discussing about wearable robotics, and what if we are able to imagine prosthetic device not only as a replacement but as an enhancement? What engineering breakthrough are needed before we can safely give human through wearable robotics?
Oh, great question. Very fun question to think about.
Thank you.
There are a few kind of major limitations, and these are kind of places that we're up against the physics of kind of how things work.
Okay.
The first would be like the way mechanical effort is provided. So assistance. We generally use electric motors to provide that in one way or another. And electric motors, are not aligned to human motion well. They produce a small amount of torque at very high speeds, and the human body produces a lot of torque at very low speeds. So just an actuator that produced effort and flow, or torque and speed, at the right power regime would be a major breakthrough. It would change everything. But that is something we haven't figured out how to do. So we are up against the physics of electromagnetics and how they work, and we pretty much get everything we can out of them. But their geometry is such that it creates power in this sort of regime that's a little challenging. So that's one, would be like power source, or I guess actuation source. The second is power source. So right now, if you're familiar with Iron Man, you know with the arc reactor, so like that would be a major breakthrough. Right now, we don't have a power source or an energy source that's really usable for extended periods of time. So like we can do hours maybe, but the power sources are defined by their kind of energy density and power density. So how much volume or mass does it take to store that energy, and how much volume mass does it take to provide that much power? And currently, the energy density of existing power supplies is still actually quite good, but for systems that use a lot of energy, the batteries would still be very large, and so autonomous vehicles showcase this very well. But so it's in a world where it can work for vehicles, but things that have to carry their power supply, it's still pretty challenging, or you end up with pretty quick like battery lives. Then the third thing is probably like specific to the prosthesis or exoskeleton use case, and that would be tapping into the human nervous system. So rather than extrapolating commands from the onboard sensor data. It would be understand the human neuromotor system and what it is trying to do and do that. But that requires understanding the human neuromotor system, which is pretty much the most complicated machine that exists. So those are three sort of like places where we are up against what we know, and we just don't have solutions for those yet.
So, the last one when it comes to understanding the neurological science of the human brain. So, how far have we gone in terms of that kind of development? Are we close? Like, can you give me a rate 20, 50, 90? Yeah.
So like right now, it's almost, well, it's
Okay.
equally a practical problem as it is like a technical problem. So just getting, so you have a water balloon is your brain, and you need to measure that water balloon without hurting it or disrupting it, and it's sort of inside someone's skull. So it's just very, very invasive to get the actual data. There are ways to get it, both through small, ultra sharp, high density electrodes that stick into the cortex, or through other methods that look at that are inserted between the skull and the brain, and it's like a sheet that measures electrical potentials across that sheet, gives you a broader spectrum, but it's not penetrating the brain. That's another option. That's called ECOG. But then there's peripheral measurements, so not measuring in the brain, but measuring in the spinal cord or in the peripheral nerves themselves, so measuring neural signals. It's all extremely practically difficult. As you can imagine, it's very difficult to measure those things, and your body is always pretty much trying to fight against you and remove whatever you do. The body's trying to extract it or push it out or encase it in scar tissue. So it's just
Yeah.
practically, it's very challenging, but we have it. We've done it. We as a field have done that. We can decode certain measurement arrays of neurons into hand grasps, or really relatively sophisticated motions, but still sort of goal directed movements. So you're teaching a monkey potentially to do a task, and we're measuring the cortex recordings from that monkey while that task is done, and then they can kind of look at how those neurons firing relate to that motion. They can turn off the monkey's ability to control its own arm, for example, with other aspects of the experiments, and then test their ability to drive it in a similar way. So it's very fascinating work. It's extremely like a long way off,
I think
before it be practical.
that reminds me of what they call it, Neuralink. I think Elon
Yep.
Elon is very close to achieving. I think they've done that. I think they implanted the first woman to use such tech. I think a month ago. I saw that tweet. So I think that was very incredible.
Neuralink is doing a good job. They've kind of gotten into the brain machine interface academic world like pretty quickly and are up to speed. I would say they're almost at the same level as a standard high performance academic lab. So Neuralink to my knowledge, they haven't yet done things that are new. They're still sort of replicating the existing state of the art, which is advanced. That's not easy to do. So
So moving forward to our next question. So currently, exoskeleton focus on mobility and rehabilitation. So how do you foresee a future where biomechanical data integration like neural signals, AMG, AI prediction allows exoskeleton to essentially think alongside the user?
that is an open question. We don't know the answer to that. What I can say right now is that I would not trust anything coming from the nervous system. Right now, it's a data fusion game, very kind of similar to your question. It's just not a fusion game with neural signals. It's only with onboard signals from the robot itself. We just don't, we don't, on the robot side, I would be very nervous to use neural signals of any kind at this point. In fact, we have a new project. This is a really cool project. It it involves, it's just starting, so we haven't done it yet. But there's a surgery that's been invented at the University of Michigan called regenerative peripheral nerve interface. So it's RPNI is the name of the surgery. It takes a transected, if you've lost limb function from an injury or a stroke, or you've had an amputation, so you don't have a limb anymore. But essentially what they do is take the nerve that was providing function, so the neural command information in that nerve is usually still there. It just can't, there's nothing to interact with, or it sort of loses that signal after this. But they take that nerve, transect it, and then wrap a small piece of deinnervated muscle tissue there. So a piece of muscle with no nerve giving it instructions. And so when deinnervated muscle is in the body, it will release biochemical factors to tell nerves near it to innervate it. So what happens is that transected nerve innervates this muscle tissue. And now when you try to move or flex the missing limb or the damaged limb, you flex this little muscle inside your body. And then that little muscle inside your body, that flexing, you can record that. And so you can use it as a way, the muscle that's there amplifies that signal about 1,000 times. So you can measure it, and then you can use it to control something that would normally have been unable to be controlled due to some injury or disease or amputation. So we are just about to start on that for exoskeletons. So to control, this is for somebody who's had a nerve injury to their legs, and we're going to try to decode those neural signals and drive their legs with an exoskeleton, which kind of straddles the line between kind of this robotics approach and sort of the neural approach. But I'm very, very excited about that. Cindy Chestic in biomedical engineering has done a lot of that work for the upper limb. So she's very familiar with that work as well.
Okay, nice. I think that reminds me of, I'm not sure. I think I connected with one of the, I've forgotten the name of this startup. A robotics leg, a robotic limb, right? They attached it to a person that got amputated. So, and the, like, what you just mentioned, it was able to control the machines. And I mean, purely, it's not, prosthetic, it's purely robotics. And I think it reminds me of what you just said. They did something like that. And yeah, thank you so much for that. And
Yeah,
yeah.
there's
So,
two other approaches that sound like that. One is called targeted muscle reinnervation, which is very, very similar, but it uses your existing musculature rather than a inserted muscle near the nerve. And then the other is the AMI, which is the antagonist agonist myoneural interface. So that's developed by Hugh Herr at MIT. And that essentially ties the agonist and antagonist together in an amputation, two muscles on both sides of the joint, and allows those muscles to still react against each other through a physical connection that's made. And so some people are now doing these sort of surgical interventions to the body to make interface with a machine better or easier. And that is very, very cool. That's excellent work.
okay. So in robotics, there's a constant trade-off between power density and width, right? Because initially you said something, you mentioned a lot about power, and understand how how devastating, how power. I don't think, I feel in the next 10 years we have, you know, batteries that can last for a year. I don't know, maybe a month or longer, but I mean, not right now we've not gotten to that level of advancement. But there's a like I'm trying to say, so there's a constant trade-off between power density and weight. So how do you see the breakthrough in material science, like lightweight composite or energy harvesting mechanism, changing the design rule of exoskeleton?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think your question is like, what are the ways, given that mass is such a serious constraint and power is desired in these assistive technologies, what tools or levers do we pull to balance those concepts?
Yeah.
And I would say, I can tell you, I have an answer to this in the machine design world, which is we specify these machines, their motors, transmissions, and batteries, and we want them to be as small and light as possible. And the thing that we've done that I would say is different than others and sort of has advanced the field of robotics is really, really modeled the the motor. It's the electric motor itself. So that I maybe mentioned this like last talk, but we want the system to get warm and even hot. So like we want to ride the system at all, pretty much a yellow line at all times, because that means we are not carrying around any extra mass, actuator mass, which begets structural mass, which begets battery mass. So like it's sort of balloons. So we do these sets of analyses that drive us to the kind of the smallest motor for the task we want it to do, and that we do that by looking at the temperatures. And so that's how we tackle that. We don't let the system be cool. If your system is always cool, then you're carrying around actuator mass that you're never using, and that means that's the exact thing we're trying to avoid. So we have a whole sort of architecture of technical steps that we follow when building a machine that ensures we land in this place, which is to say, as high power and high performance as it can be for its size and weight.
When was the open source leg? The robotics and bionics leg open source, the one that was used for an amputated person. I think I saw went viral. Principle, you said that the controls the neurons, the left motors and stuff like that. Then it sends the data to the controls, from the wherever flex the leg amputated, then it controls wherever machine. So I think, and you said it's a new project from you and then upload that. But yeah, but what is the difference between this new one and the one you guys previously worked on?
So the open source leg was started in around 2018. And that was driven by, especially at that time, there were no hardware to do research. Robotic hardware to do research with was very difficult to get. In order to have that hardware, you pretty much needed to build it, which means you had to have all that expertise. So in order to, at that time, just doing advanced robotics work was sort of predicated on this challenge of getting the hardware. So what we decided to do was build this open hardware and software platform, and that is what became the open source leg, and it's been through lots of advancement over the last kind of 7 or so years. So that is hardware, so leg powered, knee ankle system, and it's a low level control, which means it will follow trajectories or it will have certain mechanical behaviors, but it's still missing this high level control like block, and that's what we're wanting people to work on. So we want people to do the high level control work that takes in the sensor data and outputs the low level commands, which would be torques or stiffness or damping values. So that's kind of done almost, we're pretty much done with that. So we've created this platform and we're fleshing it out and helping people use it. What we're talking about, like these surgeries or, these other higher level control projects, those are one attempt at developing that set of instructions, and it could use the open source leg, for example, but it's the novelty or the science and engineering is really in this high level control approach. So that's the difference. It's that like on one part it's the hardware and software and low level resources to be able to do a study, and then the actual engineering and research is on the control or instructions.
Yeah. So when with this new one, this advancement for this kind of technology you guys are currently working on, or Rob, can you give a time frame when the world should be open to know of the advancement from the one you said 2017 and 18? So probably this one and high level uh computation and responses, and when it comes to that. So but can you give a time frame when the world should be hearing from this research and development?
I think that's kind of where the field is now. So that's the work that's being done kind of currently by researchers around the world, us included. And those like examples of those would be the two. There are publicly available controllers on the open source leg website. And those are two controllers that two different research groups that use the open source leg have created and shared. So those are examples of these kind of higher level controllers.
Okay.
The one from Professor Robert Gregg, who's at Michigan and shares a lab with me, his controller can do multiple activities. It just requires one additional sensor. So if you put that sensor on, you have access to his controller that you could just download and use. So that's an example of these higher level controller strategies, but still only using sensor data from the robot, no connection to the nervous system. So control strategies that use nervous system connection are probably a ways out, depending on the exact mechanism of neural connection, but it could be half a lifetime or something.
Okay. 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 So, do you think full lower limb replacement, the robotics leg outperforming biological ones, as realistic engineering goal within the century?
So a robotic leg acting like a human leg within the century.
Yeah.
I think so. That seems feasible. Yes, I do think that. So the exact way that will happen is not yet clear, but I'd say within this century, we'll solve that. Yeah, I do believe that's right.
So, how do you envision machine learning and digital twins transforming the ways prosthetics and exoskeleton are tuned to individual users in real time?
Totally changing the game.
Mm-hmm.
So like we are doing some of that work now. So this is the idea that like if you have a high fidelity simulator, physics-based simulation engine, then you can build a controller in simulation and then just deploy it and have it work in real world. So that's created some of the most interesting and cool looking robotics advancements, in this century. But that's sort of been off limits to the field of wearable robots because there's a human involved. So simulating the human and their interaction with the wearable robot is non-trivial, but that's also beginning to get solved. And there are some approaches that have been able to do this sim to real transfer, kind of digital twin style development, even with a simulated human. And so like some of those approaches, we're working on one right now that essentially builds two controllers in simulation, one for the robot and one for the human. And they build together in simulation and learn. And eventually that simulation can walk regularly. And we have built a controller that represents the nervous system, and we've built a controller that represents the robotic leg. And then we take the controller from simulation and code it into the hardware itself. And then run it. So that's kind of right where we are, and that we haven't tested that yet. We're getting closer.
Techniques of human enhancement often comes with robotics, and as an engineer, how do you think we should balance designing for medical necessity versus pushing towards performance augmentationally?
I think you're asking like balancing whether we answer medical questions or human augmentation questions. How do we balance that? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So that's a good question. So on one hand, my personal feeling would be my focus would probably be on the medical side because I'm compelled by the use of technology to make people's lives better. On the other hand, building a medical product is really hard and it's regulated heavily. So the pathway to that product is very different and much more challenging. So part of me, like, I guess I'm on the other hand, what I think is starting with exoskeletons as an augmentative tool might be easier to just build the industry, get the industry kind of to exist, and then convert to the medical side. But I think that might be, and I end up how it goes in terms of a consumer products of exoskeletons, but we're kind of waiting to see. But that's kind of how I see that. Like we study both. We study the augmentation side and we study the medical side. And the product side is so much easier for augmentation.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that there's strict when it comes to strict regulations for medical purposes because of it is what people take into their body. Well, so now I think this is going to be a personal question regarding your own take on all the things you've worked on and achievement, right? So if cost and energy and weight were no limitations, what would your dream for exoskeleton look like, and what would it be capable of doing for a human?
I mean, if there were no challenges, like how would I do this?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be inside the body, like it wouldn't be, ideally we wouldn't, or we would drive the body itself. If I could do anything, it would be not build X. It would be like not have to do this. Can we do this differently? Can we build a machine inside an existing limb that's impaired, and have the machine live under the skin? Things like that would be sort of amazing advancements, and would be extremely difficult, and not yet really studied. But I would say if I could have anything, it would be change the human such that we don't have to do this. There are, for example, functional electrical stimulation. It was one version of this, an idea like this, where you would send electrical currents through the skin and flex the muscles, like as if your nervous system was doing the flexing, but driving it externally. And that is something like that would be amazing. That ended up having some very serious challenges, like recruitment order inversion. So it recruits like your strongest muscles first, instead of the opposite way, which would only recruit your strongest muscles when you're contracting the hardest. So there's you fatigue really fast. If we solved some of those fundamental issues, I think something that would change the game would be a technology that makes it so that we don't have to build a robot anymore, like separate to the person. It'd be awesome to have that be the person in some way.
Mm.
So that's kind of how I think of it. I think like that would be the most exciting and in field changing methods, but also, things getting lighter and cheaper, that will also help.
Well, what should we be expecting from the team researchers from the University of Michigan? And I don't know if there are also any personalized projects you might be working on, because I know I run companies. I also do some research work for intellectual development, just so I can learn. So I don't know if you have to share maybe anything you might currently be working on, and you know when we know, so we can probably discuss that on our next podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, so a few things that we have coming up. We had just finished our variable stiffness orthosis or variable stiffness exoskeleton. So that's coming out. That I'm very excited about. We have a different version of our variable stiffness prosthetic foot, a new design that I'm very excited about. I think that's potentially a game-changing design. Um, Obviously, like the open source leg will continue to grow and be refined. Some of the coolest things we're doing on the open source leg front, kind of over the next year, we'll say, is fleshing out the simulation aspects of the project. So being able to run simulations with the open source leg. So it's the robot description files needed to do that, and the associated musculoskeletal models to run those simulations. So we have like a simulation side that we're bringing up. And then maybe the thing that I'm like most excited about right now is this is a new area that I think we might go into, which is like using artificial intelligence in the machine design process. So like currently machine design is very manual. It's done with a computer and a mouse and a monitor. And an engineer is kind of looking at this design and making changes and extruding geometric shapes, that kind of thing. But with new cloud-based CAD programs, you can access CAD collaboratively and headlessly. So from the command line, and we can start to wrap computer programs or programmatically integrate interaction with hardware, with CAD, with design. And so that's kind of taking machine design, so CAD modeling, and plugging it into the AI pipeline or sim to real pipeline. And that's kind of the next area that we're going into. I'm real excited about it.
All right. I think that sounds very amazing, right? And and hopefully I know that probably sooner or later, I don't know how far you guys can. There should be a breakthrough for that, but I'm truly looking forward to having a podcast with you on that as well. So it's truly a pleasure having this discussion with you on the human wearable robotics. Thank you so much, Professor. It's a pleasure having this podcast with you.
Yeah, you bet. It was a blast.